Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Nigeria's government has decided for a temporary period of time, at least details being continually worked on, to suspend import duties on certain food items in order to reduce the escalating price of food. Now, there's been some pushback on that. Dr. Akiwumi Additional, president of the African Development Bank Group, has faulted that. He says here Nigeria's recently announced policy to open its borders for food imports just to tackle short-term food price hikes is depressing. He continued saying that the focus area should be more long-term in terms of being able to produce jobs and the like. Says Nigeria cannot rely on the importation of food to stabilize prices. Nigeria should be producing more food to stabilize food prices while creating jobs and reducing foreign exchange spending, which will help stabilize the naira. We've got a lot more reaction to that. Let's get to our guest over in Abuja, who is going to be discussing this with us. Dr. Tony Bello, of course, he is, of course, the chief executive and founder of Bridgeport, I believe, over in Virginia. He's going to be joining us now to discuss basically the reactions to that. Actually, Shine Bridge Global Incorporated from our Abuja studios. Dr. Bello, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. What do you make of the comments on the president of the AFDB?
Good morning, first and foremost, Mr. Rotus. It's a pleasure to be on your show for the first time. Dr. Akiwumi Additional, as we all know him, we like to call him Africa's optimist in chief. A renowned agricultural economics, a subject matter expert, a financial engineer who is leading the African Development Bank through leaps and bounds. And I believe just reading through and getting the media clips on his remarks in terms of the removal of tariffs, tax-free import is a threat to the import substitution policy of government that we have observed over the past 12 years. But let's put this in context. He was speaking on the issue of food security and financial sustainability, the role of the church at the Council of Anglican Provinces of Africa retreat. So let's look at the spiritual context of his messaging, almost sounding as a prophet. Not only his academic and leadership qualifications, but almost blowing a trumpet to say, Mr. President, you have done great. You have been doing very well with the food emergency directive that was given last year, with contributions of over 130 million USD from African Development Bank, and some of the programs in wheat revolution that is ongoing in Nigeria. You started well, but at this juncture, let us watch out for the foxes that can spoil the vine. I think that was the main message in here, to focus on the things that are working under the food emergency policy or plan of Mr. President, and not to allow import substitution. Mr. President, obviously, he's like the father of our nation. No one would tell the child when the child says, I am hungry, I am famished, I need food, and say, go to bed hungry. And right. So Mr. President, I believe, is a compassionate leader in this time. And he additionally is simply saying, sir, you started well, let's finish well.
Great stuff.
And focusing on the long-term opportunities.
All right. Look, we just got, and this is key to what we're discussing. The Nigerian Bureau of Statistics has just released inflation figures for June. I'm reading it right now as they're tweeting it out. So headline inflation, 34.19% compared to 33.95 in May. So that's gone up. And for our particular discussion, Dr. Bello, food inflation now in June year on year, 40.87%, climbing from its prior level about 40.03, if I get this correctly. So we're still very much in the high 40% levels year on year for food. So food inflation continuing to climb. So with that in mind, what other options, as far as a solution to bringing down food prices in the short term, we need something now. So doesn't that justify where the government is coming from in terms of trying to allow for the duties to be removed on those imports to bring down prices? Because as these inflation figures show, it's still climbing.
Correct. And going back to Dr. Adesina's comments, I think it's a caution, it's a warning, it's to say, listen, we must focus on the long-term solutions, and we have started to do that. The African technology for African agricultural transfer is working. It worked in the northern Nigeria with significant increase in wheat production in Nigeria. The National Agricultural Credit Scheme to empower smallholder farmers, the largest private sector group we have in Nigeria, must be retooled. Let's keep focus on that. We have today about $1 billion total, when I looked at my figures, $520 million for agricultural industrialization in Nigeria. Another 300, I think it was $300 million under the green imperative. So as an investment banker, let us focus on production and productivity. Let us focus on food preservation, on food processing, and best of all, on consumer packaged goods manufacturing. Keep an eye on the promise of the Renewed Hope agenda, which is, let us feed our people. And this is where the changes and the inflationary numbers you are seeing that are being reported, these are real. So after the food emergency, what have we done to be sure that Nigeria is producing our staples all year round? This is the way to go. Dry season, wet season farming, we've done it before. We saw good results. Let's make sure we keep an eye on the ball. Private sector engagement is key. Recognizing that the farmers are truly the largest private sector group we have in Nigeria. But let's not return back to the pre-era of the agricultural transformation agenda that helped to stop corruption. Beware of the little foxes that spoils the vine. Our harvest is around the corner. So let us not continue to rely on food imports. Our food import substitution policy over the past 12 years has worked very well. And hold these people accountable. Hold them accountable. You cannot and should not import food without having a backstopping. Let us make sure that if we are giving you a waiver for short-term gain to make sure that Nigerians are able to feed well and have the right nutrition, you must commit to investing in production, at least of the equivalent of what you are being given an import status license for. Let us not just be consumers, let us also be producers.
Now, should that be at the state level? Because the head of the Lagos chapter of the Rice Farmers Association, he also was weighing in, saying that these imports are rather removing the duties on the imports for rice will impact domestic producers that his association represents. So he says here the import duties exception the government has granted for rice imports will greatly affect local rice production. Now, since Mr. Raphael Hunsa is the chair of the Lagos chapter of the Rice Farmers Association, should we be breaking these things down to states, Dr. Bello? Should we, Lagos, Akwa Ibom, wherever, Delta, should we, rather than looking at the federal government?
Absolutely. The federal government alone can incentivize and create an enabling environment in terms of access to low and affordable financing. That is one. They must invest in infrastructure, road transportation, and what have you. But the real agricultural production happens at the state level. This is where the private sectors reside. There are no private sector group in the federal capital territory who are doing massive farming. This must happen at the state level. And I tell you, I am personally very encouraged by what some governors are doing currently at the state level. There are very good examples, and we can get into those. But I couldn't agree more with my colleague at the Lagos Rice Farmers Association that we run the risk of losing everything that we have invested in production of paddy rice over the past 12 years if we continue with this short-term measure. We're saying it's 150 to 180 days. Yes, that sounds really, really good. But guess what? 12 months later, don't be surprised if the policy continues. And so government must hold whoever is bringing these imports, hold them accountable and hold them responsible. Show me your farms. If I'm giving you import for wheat, show me your wheat farm. If I'm giving you import for maize or corn, show me your farm. I think that accountability level is important, and transparency in this process, engagement of private sector is key. Incentivize the private sector. It's kind of that simple.
Indeed. What about mechanized farming in terms of boosting output, and also the cost of some of these machines, the skills needed to run them? What's your take on how best to approach that?
Absolutely. Again, the subnational government must play a key role. Land clearing, land development, and sustainable agricultural practices, including mechanization, is where the state governments can influence and encourage and incentivize the producers, the processors, and the manufacturers at the state level. It is key. The cost of hiring bulldozers for the responsible deforestation of degraded forests is pretty expensive. Add on top of that the mechanization, tractorization to prepare the land, and then you look at all the inputs. Again, state governments, local governments must all be involved with the private sector. Do not leave this just with government, but let's have the organized private sector, the Rice Farmers Association or Farmers Association of Nigeria, with real professionals in the field, with real practitioners, not political investors and briefcase investors. Enough of that. Enough of that.
Dr. Bello, we've run out of time. I just want to quickly get your outlook for food prices, I guess, for the second half of this year. We've seen those inflation figures continuing to climb. How do you see things developing, very briefly, if you can, as far as prices are concerned? Trajectory.
I can honestly tell you, I do not know whichever way, upwards or downwards, but there is need for stabilization. There are external factors that is helping to drive that. The issue of insecurity, farmer insecurity, must be addressed heads on at the presidency level, and with the support of state governments and local governments for that matter. Without resolving those farmer insecurity issues at the farm, I'm afraid we may see even higher numbers, despite the food import waivers that the government is currently instituting.
We really appreciate your time. Dr. Tony Bello, Chairman, Founder of Shine Bridge Global Incorporated. Thank you so much for talking to us about this very pressing issue of food, which is part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.